You left us.
You weren't there.
Why didn't you come back?
You promised.
Daddy has the same eyes as me, Milo announced to the entire dinner table, pointing directly at Nathan Voss. Elena Carter has spent 3 years building a quiet life for herself and her son Milo, the child she raised alone after vanishing from the world of Nathan Voss without explanation. When desperate circumstances land her a housekeeping job at the Voss estate in Newport, she tells herself she just needs to keep her head down and her son close. But Milo is 3 years old, and 3-year-olds do not understand secrets. One dinner, one pointed finger, and one innocent declaration later, the carefully constructed silence Elena has lived inside begins to crack open, and the woman who built that silence, Nathan's mother Constance, will do anything to seal it shut again. What none of them know is that the envelope Elena never opened holds the proof that will either destroy her or set them all free. The Voss estate sat at the end of Bellevue Avenue like a dare, all pale stone and iron fencing and windows that caught the Atlantic light and threw it back like the house had nothing to prove. Elena Carter stood at the service entrance on a Tuesday morning in late September, her son balanced on her left hip, her resume folded in her right hand, even though the position was already hers. She had gotten the job through a staffing agency 3 days ago. She had spent those 3 days telling herself this was just work, just a paycheck, just a roof over their heads while she figured out the next thing, and the thing after that. She had not let herself think about whose roof it was. Milo pressed his cheek against her shoulder and looked up at the wrought iron gate with the calm, evaluating expression he reserved for things he had decided were interesting. He was 3 years and 4 months old, with her dark hair and a pair of eyes that were not hers at all, a shade of blue so particular and pale it looked almost silver in certain light. People commented on those eyes constantly. Strangers in grocery stores, women at the park, the pediatrician who had known Milo since birth. Beautiful eyes, they always said. Where did he get those? And Elena would say something vague about genetics being unpredictable, and move the conversation somewhere else, and try not to think about the answer she already knew. "Big house," Milo said. "Yes," Elena said. "Is a giant live there?" "No giants, just people." He considered this. "Okay," he said, apparently satisfied, and rested his head back on her shoulder. The woman who let them in was Mrs. Garrity, the head housekeeper, a compact woman in her 60s with silver hair pinned back, and the organized efficiency of someone who had run large households for a long time, and had stopped finding it impressive. She shook Elena's hand, glanced at Milo with an expression that was not unkind, but was clearly calculating the logistics, and explained the situation plainly. The agency had mentioned a child, she said. Normally, staff did not bring children to work, but the estate's regular childcare arrangement had an opening, and Elena could use the small sitting room off the kitchen wing while Milo napped, provided he was quiet and stayed in the designated areas. It was temporary. They would sort out a more permanent arrangement within the week. Elena said that was more than fair. She meant it. She had learned a long time ago not to push against kindness when it was offered. Mrs. Garrity walked her through the ground floor, the formal rooms, the kitchen, the utility corridors, the schedule of daily tasks, and which ones rotated weekly. The estate was large, but not impossible. 7 bedrooms, 4 formal reception rooms, a library, a study, and a garden that wrapped around the eastern wing and ended at a low stone wall overlooking a stretch of private beach. The family used the estate primarily in the fall and spring. The summer months brought more people, more events, more complications. September was quiet. Mr. Voss was in residence approximately 3 weeks out of every month and traveled the rest of the time for work. His mother, Mrs. Constance Voss, maintained a suite on the 2nd floor and was present more consistently. Mrs. Constance Voss. Elena had known the name for 3 years. She had not spoken it aloud in almost as long. She kept her face neutral and asked about the cleaning protocols for the formal dining room. The morning passed in the practical rhythm of new work, learning where things were kept, how the household ran, who was responsible for what. Milo stayed in the sitting room with a box of blocks and a picture book about construction vehicles that he had nearly memorized, narrating quietly to himself in the half-real language he used when he was playing alone. Elena checked on him every 30 minutes. He was, as he almost always was when absorbed in something, entirely content. It was mid-afternoon when she took him outside. She had earned a break, and the garden was technically part of her area to maintain. And Milo had been patient all morning in a way that deserved some time in open air. She settled him on the grass near the flower beds with a small red truck and watched him drive it along the edge of the stone path, making engine noises under his breath, while she noted which beds needed deadheading and which of the rose bushes along the eastern wall were going to need attention before the season turned. She was looking at the roses when she heard the car. It was not supposed to be there. Nathan Voss was in Boston until Thursday. Mrs. Garrity had said it twice. Elena had filed the information away as fact, as safety, as one of the reasons she had told herself this was manageable. She heard the crunch of gravel from the front drive, and then voices, low and brief. The kind of exchange between a person and their driver that meant the trip had ended early, and then footsteps on the stone path that led around the side of the house to the garden. She picked Milo up before she thought about it. The movement was automatic the way it always was when something startled her, pulling him against her chest with her arms crossed over his back. Milo made a small sound of protest. He had been mid-engine noise, and then went still because he was perceptive in the way small children sometimes were registering tension before they understood its source. Nathan Voss came around the corner of the garden wall with his jacket over one arm and his phone in his hand, and his attention divided between the screen and the path ahead of him. He was taller than she had let herself remember. The gray at his temples was new. 3 years was long enough for small changes to accumulate into something that read as different without being unrecognizable. And Elena stood at the edge of the flower bed and cataloged those changes in the 2 seconds she had before he looked up and saw her. He stopped. The phone went to his side. He looked at her the way people looked at something they were trying to place. Not recognition, not quite, but the particular kind of arrested attention that preceded it. Elena was different too. Her hair was shorter. She was thinner than she had been at 24, the thinness of someone who had worked hard and slept irregularly for 3 years. She held her son against her chest like a shield, and she looked back at Nathan Voss and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not make everything worse. Milo, however, had no such constraints. He lifted his head from her shoulder and looked at the man standing 10 feet away, with the same calm, evaluating expression he had given the gate that morning. He studied Nathan Voss for a long moment. Then he pointed at him one small finger, direct and certain, and said in his clear, carrying voice, "Mommy is that man from the picture." The garden went completely quiet. Elena's arm tightened around Milo so fast that he made a small sound of protest. The picture. There was no picture. She had destroyed every photograph had gone through her phone and her laptop and the small box under her bed, and removed every image that could have constituted an answer to that question. She had been careful. She had been so careful. "What picture, baby?" she said, and her voice came out steady, which was something close to a miracle. Milo seemed to reconsider. He looked at Nathan again, then back at her with the expression of a child who was not entirely sure his memory was correct, but was not ready to abandon it either. "The picture Nana showed me," he said. "At her house. The big one." Elena's neighbor. Her neighbor's kitchen had family photographs on the wall, and Milo spent time there while Elena worked occasional evening shifts. She did not know what pictures were on those walls. She had never thought to check. She had been careful about everything, and she had missed that one thing. And now here they were. "I don't think so, sweetheart," she said. "This is Mr. Voss. He lives here. Say hello." Milo looked at Nathan with the 3-year-old's complete lack of self-consciousness and said, "Hi, I'm Milo. I have a red truck." Nathan Voss looked at the child in Elena's arms for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was. His expression had shifted into something Elena could not read. Not quite the blankness of someone trying to remain polite, not quite the sharpness of someone who had understood something. Something in between. "Hi, Milo," he said. His voice was even. "That's a good name for a truck." "It doesn't have a name," Milo said with mild offense. "It's just a truck." Something that might have been the beginning of a smile moved across Nathan's face and disappeared. He looked at Elena then, and the unreadable expression settled into something more specific. Questions held back for now, but present. She could see them the way you could see rocks under moving water. There, but not yet named. "You're the new housekeeper," he said. "Yes, Elena Carter. I'm sorry I was told you weren't due back until Thursday. I wouldn't have brought him out here if I had known." "It's fine," he said. The meeting ended early. He said it without accusation, without particular warmth. He looked at Milo one more time, a look that lasted slightly too long to be casual. And then he looked away and continued along the path toward the house, his jacket still over his arm, his phone still in his hand. Elena stood in the garden and did not move until she heard the door close behind him. "He was nice," Milo said. "Yes," Elena said. "His eyes are like mine." "Lots of people have blue eyes," she said. "Not like mine," Milo said with the serene certainty of a child who has examined the question and reached a conclusion. "Mine are special," Grandma said. Elena set him down on the grass and crouched in front of him and took his small face in both her hands and looked at him. Really, looked the way she did sometimes when she needed to remind herself what she was doing all of this for. His eyes looked back at her, silver blue and steady and entirely themselves. "Your eyes are very special," she said. "Now pick up your truck. We're going inside." She did not look up at the second-floor windows as they crossed the garden, but she felt them. The feeling had weight to it, solid and cold as river stone, and it stayed with her through the rest of the afternoon and into the evening through Milo's bath and his dinner and the story about the construction vehicles, and the moment when he fell asleep with his hand curled under his chin and his breathing gone slow and even. She sat beside his small travel cot in the staff quarters bedroom and listened to him breathe, and told herself she had handled it. She had redirected the question. Nathan had shown no sign of recognition. It was fine. She just needed to get through the week, and then the next week, and then find a different job and leave Newport the same way she had left every place she had ever allowed herself to get too comfortable in. She did not let herself think about what it had cost her to stand in that garden and look at him. She did not let herself think about the way Milo had pointed and said that man from the picture, with the absolute confidence of a child who was certain of what he knew. She did not let herself think about what it meant that the picture existed at all. What she did think about, much later, lying awake in the narrow staff bedroom with the sound of the ocean faint through the window, was the moment she had arrived on this job and Mrs. Garrity had introduced herself and walked her through the house. Halfway through the kitchen wing, Mrs. Garrity had paused to answer a question from one of the other staff, and Elena had glanced up at the board near the service entrance, where the household schedule was pinned, and she had seen a small photograph clipped to the upper corner of the board, a picture of the family formal and posed the kind used for announcements or profiles. Constance Voss had been in the photograph, and when Elena had looked at her, the woman in the photograph had been looking directly at the camera, with an expression of composed, settled authority. Elena had recognized that expression. She had last seen it 3 years ago, across a table in a hotel lobby in Boston, when Constance Voss had slid an envelope across the table and said in a voice entirely without malice that this was the most practical solution for everyone involved. The photograph on the board. The woman in the photograph had been looking at the camera, but when Elena had seen her really registered who she was looking at, she had felt certain, with a certainty that had no logical basis and that she had immediately tried to dismiss, that Constance Voss had not been surprised to see Elena Carter's file cross her desk. She lay in the dark and listened to her son breathe, and told herself she was wrong. She told herself that 3 more times before she finally slept. She was wrong about being wrong. The next morning confirmed it in small, specific ways that Elena cataloged without allowing herself to react. Mrs. Garrity, brisk and organized, and entirely unknowing, handed Elena the week's task list and mentioned that Mrs. Constance would be in residence starting Wednesday. She said it the way she said everything, matter-of-factly, without subtext. Elena wrote Wednesday in her mental calendar and moved on. She spent the morning on the formal rooms dusting, polishing the kind of work that was physical enough to keep her hands busy and repetitive enough to let her mind run calculations in the background. She was good at this. She had always been good at finding the math in a situation, working out the variables, identifying the exits. It was how she had survived most of her life, and it was how she had survived the last 3 years specifically, and she applied it now to the problem of Newport. Variables. Nathan was back early. Constance was arriving Wednesday. Milo had pointed at Nathan and asked about a picture. Nathan had looked at Milo for slightly too long. Exits. She could ask to end the contract. She could claim a family emergency. There was a certain dark humor in that particular lie. She could simply leave, pack the travel cot and the box of picture books and Milo's red truck into her second-hand car and drive north until Newport was far enough behind her that it felt theoretical. She had run the exit calculation before. She was fast at it now. But she was also at this point in her life tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She was tired of running the exit calculation. She was tired of every new place being temporary by design, every new job, another stepping stone to nowhere in particular. Every time Milo made a friend at a playground or learned the name of a new neighbor, it being one more thing she would have to ask him to leave behind. He was 3. He did not yet understand leaving. He would, if she kept at this pace. She did not want to be the reason her son learned early and deeply that belonging somewhere was not for people like them. So she stayed. She cleaned the formal dining room and the sitting room and the hallway with the tall mirrors, and she checked on Milo in the kitchen wing sitting room every 30 minutes, and she told herself she would stay through the week and see how it went. Nathan Voss she saw at a distance, briefly in the hallway near the library on Tuesday afternoon, where he acknowledged her with a nod and continued on phone already at his ear. He had the focused, self-contained quality of someone whose attention was almost always somewhere else. A man whose life happened in planes and boardrooms and on screens, and who moved through the physical world with the brisk efficiency of someone passing through rather than inhabiting. Elena had known that about him 3 years ago. She had thought once that she was the exception to it. She had learned otherwise in a hotel lobby in Boston, with an envelope on the table between her and his mother, and the understanding settling over her that she had misread the situation entirely. She had not been the exception. She had been the complication. She reminded herself of this on Tuesday afternoon, watching Nathan Voss disappear around the corner of the hallway without looking back. Wednesday arrived with fog off the ocean and the sound of a car on the front drive at 11 in the morning. Elena was in the garden, cutting back the rose canes the way Mrs. Garrity had shown her when she heard it. She did not go to look. She kept her attention on the roses and let the sound of the car and the voices and the brief opening and closing of the front door wash past her, and she told herself she was fine. Milo was inside with Mrs. Garrity, who had taken an unexpected liking to him and had given him a small task involving sorting silverware by size that he was applying himself to with great seriousness. Elena was alone in the garden when the side door opened and Constance Voss stepped out. She was 71 years old and looked as she always had, 10 years younger. Her white hair was styled with the understated precision of a woman who had never once left the house looking anything less than entirely intentional. She wore pale gray wool and low heels and a string of pearls that were real without announcing themselves. She walked with a cane she had not had 3 years ago, and she crossed the garden path toward Elena with the deliberate pace of someone who had decided well before opening the door exactly what this conversation would contain. Elena straightened and set down her clippers and waited. Constance Voss stopped 3 feet away. She looked at Elena the way she had looked at her in the hotel lobby, the gaze of someone performing a calculation that had nothing to do with sentiment. "Miss Carter?" she said. "Mrs. Voss," Elena said. "I was told you started Monday." "That's correct." Constance's gaze moved to the rose beds and then back. "I didn't anticipate this specific arrangement when I approved the staffing list," she said. "The agency forwards the names, but not always the details." It was, Elena noted, not an apology and not an accusation. It was information being exchanged, terms being established. She had forgotten a little how precise the woman was. "I see," Elena said. "I think it would be best," Constance said, "if we were to discuss—" The side door opened again, and Milo came out at a near run, clutching a dessert spoon in each hand, calling Mommy in the carrying voice of a child who has completed a task and wants credit for it. He stopped when he saw the second woman. He looked at Constance with his usual evaluative calm. Constance Voss looked at Milo. The calculation in her expression flickered, replaced for just a moment by something else, something quicker and less controlled. A response she had not managed to suppress in time. Elena saw it. It was gone almost immediately, replaced by the composed surface. But she had seen it, and she filed it away in the part of her mind where she kept things that mattered. "That's my son," Elena said. Her voice was steady. "Milo, come here, please." Milo came to her side, still holding the spoons, and looked up at Constance with frank curiosity. "Are you old?" he asked. "Milo," Elena said. "I'm asking," he said, unrepentant. Constance looked at him for a moment that was fractionally too long. Then she said precisely and without warmth, "Yes." Milo seemed to accept this as a reasonable answer. He held out one of the spoons to Elena as though this concluded his business and went back inside. Constance watched the door close after him. "We should speak privately," she said. "Not here." "I agree," Elena said. "Tonight, after dinner." Elena looked at her the composed face, the pearl necklace, the cane, the eyes that were doing the calculation again. She looked at all of it, and she thought about the envelope, and she thought about the hotel lobby, and she thought about the 3 years she had spent carrying what had been in that envelope without ever looking at what it actually said. "Tonight," she said. She watched Constance walk back toward the house, and she picked up her clippers, and she went back to the roses. They met that night in the small office near the utility corridor after Milo was asleep, and the dinner service was done, and Mrs. Garrity had retired for the evening. Constance was already seated when Elena arrived, which was, Elena noted, a choice. Constance did not offer her a seat, which was also a choice. Elena sat anyway. "The arrangement 3 years ago was straightforward," Constance began. "It was," Elena said. "I'd like to understand what was actually in the envelope." A pause. Not long. Constance was too controlled for meaningful pauses, but present. "What do you mean?" "I never opened it," Elena said. The silence that followed was different from the pause. It had texture to it, weight, the quality of something recalibrating. "You never opened it," Constance said. "No." Another silence. Then, "Why not?" Elena looked at her. "Because I was 24 and frightened, and I thought if I opened it and read it, it would make everything more real than I could handle. So I took it, and I left, and I put it in a box and I didn't look at it." Constance studied her for a long moment. The calculation was running, but something else was running alongside it now. Something that might have been, in a different woman, unease. "Where is it now?" she asked. "Still in the box," Elena said. The conversation ended shortly after that, without resolution, because Constance had not come prepared for this variable. Elena went back to her room, and Milo slept, and the ocean was audible through the window, and Elena lay in the dark and thought about the envelope in the bottom of her bag, because she had in fact brought it with her. She had brought it from every apartment, every temporary room, every hasty departure. She had carried it for 3 years without knowing what it said. She fell asleep thinking that she should open it soon. She should have opened it a long time ago. The private dining room on the ground floor of the Voss estate was not where the family usually ate. That room, long formal, designed for the kind of dinners that were also business meetings, was reserved for occasions requiring a certain weight of impression. The everyday meals happened in the smaller breakfast room off the kitchen wing, where the table seated 6 and the light came in from the garden, and it was possible, if you were the kind of person who could forget where you were, to feel almost ordinary. Thursday's dinner was not ordinary. Elena learned about it at 2 in the afternoon when Mrs. Garrity appeared in the doorway of the utility room with the expression of someone managing a logistical emergency with professional composure. The regular dinner service coordinator, a woman named Della, who handled all formal events at the estate, had gone to the hospital that morning with what appeared to be appendicitis. The dinner was in 5 hours. Nathan had 2 business associates coming from New York, men who had flown in specifically for this engagement, and canceling was not an option. Mrs. Garrity appeared willing to consider. "You have hospitality experience," Mrs. Garrity said. It was not a question. The agency file had listed it. "Some," Elena said carefully. "Can you manage a formal dinner service for 5? I'll handle the kitchen coordination. I need someone who can work the table." Elena thought about saying no. She built the case for it quickly, the way she always built exit calculations. The exposure, the proximity to Nathan, the risk of extended time in a room with him and his mother, and whatever conversation happened over a formal dinner table with wine, and the particular loosening of professional guards that came with it. Then she thought about Della with appendicitis, and Mrs. Garrity with the expression of someone holding 6 things together with 2 hands. And she said, yes. The sitter she had arranged for Milo's aftercare canceled at 3, which was when things became complicated. The backup sitter, a student who sometimes covered when needed, texted at 3:15 to say she was running late, possibly very late, possibly an hour and a half. Dinner service began at 7. The math did not work. Mrs. Garrity, when told, did not blink. "He can stay in the kitchen," she said. "He's been good this week. Keep him in the back, and I'll have Maria watch him while you work the table." Milo, when informed of this plan, accepted it with the equanimity he brought to most things. He wanted to know if there would be dessert. Mrs. Garrity told him there would be chocolate mousse. He said that was acceptable. Elena dressed him in his cleanest clothes, small dark pants and a blue shirt that she ironed with the estate's iron, which was better than hers in the half hour before service, and took him to the kitchen wing at 6:30, where Maria, one of the kitchen staff, received him with the warmth of someone who had already been won over by 3 days of his commentary on construction vehicles. At 10 minutes to 7, Elena went to take her position for service. The formal dining room looked different when it was set for a dinner. The long table with its white linen, the heavy silver, the crystal that caught the light from the chandelier. Elena had cleaned this room 4 times since Monday, and had spent no emotional energy on it because it had been empty. Set and lit and occupied, it had a different quality entirely. She stood near the sideboard and did the internal calibration that good service required, where everyone would sit, what the sequence of courses was, which glasses were for which wine, and told herself this was just work. She was good at service. She had done it for years. She did not need to look at Nathan Voss directly to do her job. He came in at 7 with the 2 business associates, both of them in the confident late 40s that successful men occupied like a comfortable chair. And Constance Voss was already seated at the far end. The conversation was already in progress, something about a development in coastal Connecticut, numbers and square footage, and the particular shorthand of people who had been talking business together for a long time. Elena poured water. She did not look at Nathan. She was on the 3rd course when she heard the door. Not the main door, the service corridor door, the one that connected to the kitchen wing. It opened a fraction, and then it opened further, and Milo came through it in his small dark pants and his ironed blue shirt, holding his red truck with the expression of a child who has applied independent reasoning to a problem and arrived at a solution he finds satisfactory. Elena saw him before he fully entered the room. She began moving immediately, but the room was long, and she was on the far side of the table, and Milo moved fast when he was motivated. And he was motivated now by the sight of all those people, and the interesting-looking food, and the chandelier that he had apparently noticed during one of her cleaning sessions and mentioned several times since. He crossed the room with purpose. He climbed without hesitation into the empty chair beside Nathan Voss. The conversation stopped. Milo set his truck on the table, looked around at the assembled adults with calm interest, and then turned to examine the person sitting directly beside him. Nathan Voss looked at the child who had materialized in the chair next to him. Milo looked back. The moment had the specific suspended quality of a breath held just slightly too long. Then Milo pointed at Nathan, one small finger direct and certain, the same gesture he had used in the garden on Monday, and said in his clear, carrying voice that cut through the silence of the formal dining room like a stone through still water, "Daddy has the same eyes as me." The room did not move. Elena had stopped 3 feet from the table. She could not reach him without going around 2 chairs and past one of the business associates, and she was standing very still because something had happened to her ability to move efficiently. She was aware of the table and the candles, and the 2 men from New York looking at each other, and then at Milo, and then at Nathan. And she was aware of Constance at the far end of the table, with her wine glass paused halfway to her mouth, and she was aware of Nathan. Nathan, who had gone very still. Nathan, who was looking at Milo with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the calculating stillness she knew, not the brisk efficiency, not even the something in between from the garden on Monday. This was different. This was the expression of a man encountering a thing he had not prepared for and could not yet name. He looked at Milo. Then he looked at Elena. The question was there, exactly as she had known it would be, eventually visible and specific, and no longer held back by anything. It had moved past the water and up to the surface, and it was looking at her, directly across the white linen and the heavy silver and the remains of the 3rd course. And it was not going to be redirected. Elena heard herself say, "Milo, come here, please." "But I wanted to see the chandelier," Milo said, not unreasonably. Constance set her wine glass down. She did it precisely with the decisive sound that might in different circumstances have ended a meeting. She said, "I think perhaps," and she was already pushing back from her chair, already moving toward the kind of redirect that 3 years of practice had made automatic. Nathan raised one hand. It was a small gesture. It did not raise his voice, did not turn to look at Constance, did not address the 2 men from New York who were sitting with the particular careful stillness of people who understood they were witnessing something private. He raised one hand, palm out, and the conversation stopped. He looked at Milo. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice was even, measured, the voice of someone applying considerable control to a specific task. "Milo?" Milo said. He held up the truck. "I have a truck." "I see that," Nathan said. "How old are you, Milo?" Milo held up 3 fingers, then reconsidered and held up 3 fingers on one hand and tried to add a half on the other, which resulted in an unclear numerical gesture. 3.5, he said. "Almost." Nathan nodded. He looked at the truck. Then he looked at Elena. "Miss Carter," he said, "could you take Milo to the kitchen, please?" It was not a question. It was a sentence constructed to sound like a request and function like something else entirely. "Yes," Elena said. "I'm sorry for the interruption." She went around the table. She picked Milo up. He came without protest, recognizing something in her tone, and she carried him to the service corridor door. And she did not look back at Nathan or Constance or the 2 men from New York. She looked straight ahead at the door, and she pushed through it, and the door closed behind her. Maria was in the corridor, wide-eyed, already apologizing. Milo had slipped away in the 2 minutes she had been getting him his mousse. Elena said it was fine. It was all right. She just needed Maria to take him for the next 30 minutes. She handed him over. Milo went to Maria, still holding his truck, and looked back at Elena with the expression he had when he sensed she was upset about something and was not sure whether to ask. "Mommy okay?" he said. "Mommy's fine," she said. "Go have your mousse." She stood in the service corridor for a moment after they disappeared into the kitchen. She put one hand flat against the wall and breathed through the shaking in her chest that she had not allowed to be visible, that she was not going to allow to become anything useful to anyone who might be watching, that she needed to get under control before she went back into that dining room and finished the service like a professional. She breathed. She went back in. The dinner continued. The two business associates had been absorbed back into conversation with the particular social skill of men who had navigated awkward moments in enough professional settings to treat them as unremarkable. Constance had returned to her seat. The conversation was about Connecticut again. Nathan did not look at her. That was somehow harder than the looking would have been. She moved through the rest of the service, clearing the third course, bringing the fourth, managing the wine, and Nathan did not look at her once. And she was aware of this with each pass, each small and necessary proximity, each moment when the job required her to lean slightly into his peripheral vision, and he kept his gaze elsewhere. He was thinking. She could see it in the set of his jaw and the particular quality of his participation in the conversation. Present, responsive, correct, but with the sense of a significant portion of his attention engaged elsewhere. Processing. She knew what he was processing. She finished the service and went to collect Milo, who had eaten his mousse and fallen asleep on the small sofa in the back corridor with his truck still in his hand, his dark hair spread across the cushion. She stood over him for a moment and looked at his sleeping face, the dark lashes, the particular set of his jaw, the silver blue eyes closed now but present in the memory of them. And she thought about 3 years of calculating exits and temporary rooms and the picture on her neighbor's wall that she had not thought to check. She thought about the envelope at the bottom of her bag. When she went back to the staff quarters later, after Milo was in his cot and asleep, she took the bag out from under the bed, and she held the envelope in her hands for a long time. It was worn at the corners, the paper softened by 3 years of being carried and moved and packed and unpacked. The seal was still intact. Her name was on the front, in handwriting she recognized as Constance Voss's small, precise. The handwriting of someone who had been taught penmanship by someone who believed it mattered. She put it back in the bag. Not tonight, she told herself. But she knew in the place where honest knowledge lived that tonight was almost over, and tomorrow was coming, and she was running out of before. Constance, meanwhile, was not sleeping. Elena did not know this, but she would have guessed it because she had seen the look on Constance's face when the service door closed. A look that had nothing of calculation in it, that was something rawer and less composed. It was the look of a person who had managed a situation for 3 years and watched it, in the space of one dinner and one declaration from a 3-year-old, become significantly harder to manage. She sat in her suite on the second floor with her phone in her hand, and she called someone. The call lasted 12 minutes. Afterward, she sat very still and looked at the ocean through the window, and thought about the envelope, and about what it did and did not contain, and whether the girl had really not opened it, and whether that changed anything. She decided it changed everything. She needed to speak to Elena tomorrow, before Nathan did. She had not anticipated this arrangement, but she had not become who she was by failing to adjust to variables. She put down the phone and went to bed. In the morning, she would manage it. She had always been very good at managing things. Nathan found her at 8 in the morning. Elena was in the library, which was her first task on Fridays, dusting the shelves, checking that the reference volumes were in order. The weekly maintenance of a room that was used often enough to need attention, and carefully enough that it rarely needed much. She liked the library. It had the quality of a room that had been genuinely used for its purpose. The shelves full but organized. The desk in the center bearing the marks of real work. She was on the upper gallery, working along the top shelves, when she heard the door open below. She looked down. Nathan stood in the doorway, in a dark sweater and dark trousers, with coffee in one hand and the expression of a man who had been awake for a while, and had spent that time thinking rather than sleeping. He looked up at her without preamble. "When you're done with that shelf," he said, "I'd like to talk." She came down the spiral stairs at the end of the gallery. She set her cloth and the small maintenance kit on the lower shelf and turned to face him. He was standing by the central desk, now the coffee set aside, his hands in his pockets, watching her. "All right," she said. "Milo," he said. "How old is he?" 3, 3.5 almost. "When's his birthday?" "March 15th. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him count backward, the way she had done herself many times, the calculation that began in March and ended the previous June, which was when she had been working the contractor placement at Voss Capital's Boston office for 11 days before everything had changed and then ended. "Who is his father?" Nathan said. He said it flat, without inflection, a question that was also, in some ways, already an answer. "I don't see why that's—" "Because he has a specific eye color that is not common," Nathan said. "Because he is 3.5. Because last night he called a man he had never met Daddy at a dinner table. I am not asking you to confirm something I already suspect. I am asking you to stop making me ask around it." Elena looked at him. The library was quiet around them, the morning light coming in through the tall windows, the smell of old paper and lemon oil. She had played this conversation in her imagination for 3 years. Different versions of it, different locations, different levels of preparation on her part. She had never played it here, in this library, with him looking at her like that, and the coffee going cold on the desk beside him. "You already know," she said. "I want to hear you say it." "Why?" "Because I've spent 3 years believing something about you that I want to know is wrong," he said. His voice was still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. A pressure that the control was managing rather than eliminating. "And I need you to tell me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes, he's yours." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. Nathan did not move for a moment. Then he exhaled, not dramatically, not with visible collapse, just the precise release of a breath that had been held for slightly too long. He picked up the coffee and put it down again, without drinking it. "You left," he said. "You didn't tell me." "I know. You disappeared. There was a letter." "I know about the letter. It said I didn't write it," she said. He stopped. He looked at her with the specific arrested attention of someone who has just heard a sentence reorganize their understanding of an event. "What? I didn't write it," she said again. "I don't know exactly what it said because I never saw it, but I didn't write it." The silence had a different quality now. "Then who?" The door opened. Constance Voss came in without knocking, which Elena would later understand was not an oversight, but a decision. She was already dressed, already composed. The white hair pinned the pearls in place. She looked at Elena first, a look that lasted just slightly too long to be casual, and then at Nathan. "I thought I might find you here," she said, addressing Nathan. "We should talk." "We're in the middle of something," Nathan said. "I know," Constance said. "That's why I'm here." Elena watched the exchange. She was aware of the position she was standing in between the desk and the lower shelves, with the two of them on either side of the room, and the conversation about to take a turn she had not yet mapped. Constance looked at Elena again. The composed surface was entirely in place, but Elena had seen its underside twice now, in the garden when Milo had walked out, and at the dinner table when the service door had closed, and she knew what lived below it. "Miss Carter," Constance said, "I believe we were going to speak last night, and the conversation was interrupted." "We spoke Wednesday night," Elena said. "We began a conversation. I'd like to finish it." "Perhaps," Nathan said with the precise quietness of a man containing something large. "You could explain to me what conversation you and Ms. Carter have already had?" Constance looked at her son. The calculation was running visibly now, because she was too intelligent not to understand that the calculation was visible, and that continuing to conceal it served no purpose. 3 years ago, she said, I met with Miss Carter privately. I was concerned about a situation that I believed required a practical resolution. "What situation?" Nathan said. "She had been working at your Boston office for 11 days, Constance said. She was a temporary contractor. There had been a pause, a personal development. She was pregnant, Nathan said flatly. Constance's expression did not change. Yes, and you met with her. I did. And I knew nothing about it, Constance said. I handled it. The 3 words fell into the library like stones into very still water. Elena watched Nathan process them. She could see the moment it landed fully, the precise alignment of the timeline and the letter, and the 3 years, and Milo's eyes, and the word handled applied to his son's existence as though it were a scheduling conflict. She watched something shift in his face, something that had been contained become something that was not going to stay contained. You handled it, he said. His voice had gone very quiet. She had not heard him use that particular quietness before, but she understood immediately that it was not calm. It was the register of a man who had moved past ordinary anger into something that needed more careful management. Nathan, you met with her, he said. You gave her something. I provided a resolution. What did you give her? He said. Constance looked at Elena. It was a sideways look, a calculation running on a new variable, the fact of the unopened envelope, which Constance had not been expecting and had not yet fully integrated. An envelope, Constance said. What was in it? Constance was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the careful precision of someone selecting words the way a surgeon selected instruments, a document, and something to facilitate her decision. A document, Nathan said. Yes. What kind of document? Constance's composure held, but Elena could see the hairline fracture running through it, the place where what she was saying and what she had done were about to become irreconcilable. An agreement, Constance said. Did it have my name on it? Nathan said. The library was entirely silent. Constance said nothing. Did it have my signature on it? Nathan said. It resolved the situation. Answer the question, Nathan said. Did you put my name on a document I never saw? Constance set her chin at a slight angle. The composure was intact, but it had hardened, the way things hardened when they were under pressure that wasn't going away. I acted in the family's best interest, she said. You were in the middle of the Halcourt acquisition. A complication of that kind would have... Stop, Nathan said. She stopped. He looked at Elena. The envelope. Do you still have it? Elena thought about the envelope at the bottom of her bag in the staff quarters bedroom, worn at the corners, sealed intact. She thought about 3 years of carrying it and not looking. She thought about Wednesday night in the office near the utility corridor, when Constance had asked where it was with the expression of someone recalibrating to a new variable. Yes, she said. Something moved across his face, not relief, not quite, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who has been trying to build a case in the dark and has just been told a key piece of evidence still exists. I'd like to see it, he said. Nathan, Constance said. Not now, he said to her without looking away from Elena. I'd like to see the envelope. When you're ready. Elena nodded once. Constance looked between them. The calculation that was always running in her expression had moved into a different register, not managing a situation, but responding to one that had moved outside her control. Elena recognized this because she had been responding to situations outside her control for 3 years, and she knew what it looked like on a person's face. I'll be in my suite, Constance said. When you've had time to. I'll come find you, Nathan said, still without looking at her. After I've spoken with Ms. Carter. Constance left. The door closed behind her precisely without drama. Nathan and Elena stood in the library in the morning light. He said, Tell me from the beginning. She told him. Not all of it, not yet. But the frame of it, the 11 days in Boston, the way things had happened. The morning 3 weeks later when she had taken a test in a gas station bathroom in Providence and sat in her car for an hour afterward. The call she had made to the staffing agency to ask about returning to the placement which had gone nowhere. The letter she had received, not from him as she had initially assumed, but a standard form notification through the agency, saying the contractor position had ended. She had read it as what it was, work ending, and she had been managing that on its own terms when Constance had called. The hotel lobby in Boston, the table, the envelope. The way Constance had said without malice and without warmth that this was the most practical solution for everyone involved. The way Elena had understood in that moment everything she needed to understand about where she stood in the architecture of the Voss world, not as a person with claims, but as a variable being resolved. "She told me you had agreed," Elena said. She didn't say those words exactly. She said the family had considered the situation and this was the resolution. "I assumed that included you." Nathan was very still. "I knew nothing about it," he said. "I know that now." "You believed me capable of that?" It was not quite an accusation, but it had an edge. The edge of a man who has been told that someone who knew him believed him capable of paying a woman to disappear with his child, and found that knowledge sitting badly. Elena looked at him. "I was 24, she said. "I had grown up in foster care. I had never had anything that wasn't temporary." "You were Nathan Voss, and I was a temporary contractor who had spent 11 days in your office building. When a woman in pearls told me the family had made a decision, I didn't have a framework that told me to question it." He was quiet for a long time. "I looked for you," he said. "After the letter. The agency said you'd asked them not to share your contact information." Elena shook her head slowly. "I never asked that." The silence had a different quality now. The quality of two people standing on either side of a gap that had been built by someone else, looking at the distance between them. "The envelope," Nathan said. "What do you think is in it?" "I don't know," she said. "I know what she gave me. I don't know what the document says. Will you let me see it?" Elena thought about the worn paper and the intact seal and the 3 years of carrying it and not looking. She thought about what it would mean to open it, what it would mean to know, finally, what had actually been agreed to in her name, what had been signed with a signature that was not hers. "Yes," she said, "but I want to read it first, before you do." He nodded once. "Tonight," he said. "Bring it to the study at 9. He picked up his coffee, which was cold, and he left the library. Elena stood for a moment in the quiet. Then she went back up the spiral stairs and finished dusting the upper shelves, because the work still needed doing, and she was still, technically, the housekeeper. She moved her cloth along the spines of the books, and she thought about what she was going to find in that envelope. She had known on some level since Wednesday night, when Constance had asked where it was, with a face that was trying not to show how much it mattered. She had known something larger was inside it than a check and a standard non-disclosure. She thought about the way Constance had looked at Milo in the garden, that fractional flicker before the composure reasserted itself. She thought about the staffing agency, saying she had asked for her information to be withheld. She thought about a document with Nathan's name on it that Nathan had never signed. She was done with the upper shelves by 9:30. She went to get Milo from Maria, who had become his unofficial morning companion, and she held his hand as they walked back to the staff quarters. And she thought about tonight. She thought about the envelope. She thought about the fact that she had carried it for 3 years because she was afraid to know what it said. She was not afraid anymore. She was something else now, something that had the same temperature as fear, but ran in the opposite direction. Milo stopped at the bottom of the staff stairs and looked up at her. "Mommy has a thinking face," he said. "Mommy is thinking," she confirmed, "about the big man." She looked down at him, the silver blue eyes, the dark hair, the small, serious face. "A little bit," she said. "He was nice," Milo said for the second time. "At dinner. He didn't make me leave right away." "No," she said. "He didn't." Milo considered this. "Is he coming back for dinner?" "He lives here," Elena said. Milo's eyes widened slightly, as though this had not fully registered before. "Every dinner?" "Most of them, yes." He thought about this for a moment. Then he picked up her hand again and started up the stairs. "Okay," he said. "That's okay." She opened it at 8:15, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed in the staff quarters, with Milo asleep in his cot and the door closed and the ocean audible and the envelope in her hands. She had been sitting with it for 20 minutes before she opened it. She had held it the way you held something before crossing a threshold, aware that the act of opening was irreversible, that whatever was inside it had been true for 3 years already, and she had simply chosen not to know. She turned it over, her name on the front in Constance Voss's handwriting. The seal intact, slightly softened from 3 years of being carried and moved and packed and unpacked. The paper worn at the corners. She opened it. There were 3 things inside. The first was a check. She had expected this. What she had not expected was the amount, $20,000, which was more than she had thought at the time, and which, seen now with 3 years of distance, read differently. Not a payoff, a statement. A number chosen to be large enough to be undeniable and specific enough to bind. The second was a document. She unfolded it carefully because the paper had the quality of something that had been folded and refolded in her bag for 3 years and did not want to cooperate. It was 4 pages, dense text, the kind of language that required a lawyer to fully parse, but that she could read well enough to understand the structure. It was an agreement. It used her name. It used Nathan Voss's name. It bore on the final page a signature beside Nathan Voss's printed name. She looked at the signature for a long time. She had seen Nathan's actual signature twice, once on a document she had processed during the contractor placement in Boston, once on a piece of correspondence she had handled for Mrs. Garrity this week. She was not a handwriting expert, but she did not need to be because the signature on this document did not look like either of those signatures. It looked like a signature that had been produced by someone who had a general sense of what the signature looked like and had approximated it with confidence, the way forgers did when they knew their work would only need to pass casual inspection. She read the agreement. It said in the language lawyers used when they wanted precision to function as obscuring, that Elena Carter agreed to receive $20,000 in exchange for the voluntary cessation of any future contact with Nathan Voss or any member of the Voss family, the voluntary waiver of any claims related to the period of contractor employment, and the voluntary agreement that any children born subsequent to the signing date would not be identified in connection with Nathan Voss or any member of the Voss family. She set it down. She picked up the third item. It was a single sheet folded separately, with a different texture, heavier paper, the kind used for formal correspondence. She unfolded it. It was a copy of a document she had not expected to find. The header identified it as an excerpt from the estate planning documents of Richard Alverton Voss, deceased, with the date of his death 7 years prior. The body of the excerpt was short, a single paragraph, formal language, the kind of thing that had been written by someone who knew exactly what they were writing and chose every word accordingly. The paragraph read as follows. In the event that any child of Nathan Richard Voss is born during Nathan's lifetime, that child shall be the primary beneficiary of the Alverton Trust, a separate and irrevocable trust comprising the assets herein listed to be administered independently of the general Voss estate and not subject to the conditions or authority of any trustee other than the child's legal guardian until the child reaches majority. She read it again. She read it a third time. She sat on the edge of her bed with the 3 pieces of paper in her lap, and she looked at the wall, and she understood with the specific settling clarity of a thing finally seen whole why Constance Voss had been in that hotel lobby 3 years ago. Not because of Nathan, not because of the complication to the Halcourt acquisition, not because of the social embarrassment of a temporary contractor's unplanned pregnancy. Because of this single paragraph, this irrevocable trust in a dead man's handwriting naming as its beneficiary the first grandchild born to Nathan Voss, a trust that Constance could not control, could not access, and could not inherit, administered entirely by the child's own guardian and entirely outside her reach. Milo was 3.5 years old. He had been 3.5 years old since March. The trust had been sitting irrevocable and accumulating for 3.5 years, and Constance had known about it for at least as long as she had known about Elena's pregnancy. Elena folded the 3 documents back into the envelope. She held the envelope in her hands, and she thought about what she was about to do. Because she had a choice, she understood that clearly, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She could keep this to herself. She could find another job, another city, another temporary room, and she could take this envelope with her, the way she had taken it everywhere else, and she could know what it said without telling anyone. Milo's life would continue as it had been. Quieter. Simpler. Outside the reach of the Voss estate and Constance's management and Nathan's questions, and the whole complicated gravity of a world that had once, for 11 days, allowed her near it before reminding her of her position. She was very good at simpler. She had been doing simpler for 3 years. But Milo had rights. Real, legal, irrevocable rights laid down by a grandfather who had died before ever knowing they would be needed. And those rights were currently being withheld by a woman who had forged a signature and paid a scared 24-year-old to go away, and called it resolution. Elena was not 24 anymore. She was not scared in the way she had been. And she was very, very tired of simpler. She picked up the envelope, and she went to find Nathan Voss. The study was at the end of the east corridor, past the library, with a view of the garden and the beach wall. She knocked at 8:50. He said, "Come in." She came in. He was at his desk, not doing anything visible, sitting with his hands on the desk surface and his attention on the door, as though he had been waiting precisely like this since 9 o'clock became a real time on the clock instead of a proposed one. He looked at the envelope in her hands. "Sit down," he said. She sat in the chair across from the desk, the chair for people who came to talk to Nathan Voss about things, and she was now one of those people. And she set the envelope on the desk between them. "Read it before I tell you what I think," she said. "I want to know if you see what I see." He picked it up. He opened it with the careful, deliberate motion of someone who had already understood that what was inside it had weight. He took out the 3 items. He read them in order. She watched his face. The check, no visible reaction, but a slight tightening around the jaw that indicated a reaction being managed. The agreement she saw the moment he got to the final page. He looked at the signature. He went very still. He looked at it for a long time, then looked up at her, and she saw in his face the precise moment that the confirmation landed not just suspicion, but certainty. The particular look of a man who has been told by incontrovertible evidence that someone he trusted did something he would not have sanctioned. The 3rd document, he read it twice. Then he set it down very precisely on the desk in front of him. "She knew about this," he said. "It's a copy," Elena said. "She made a copy of it," which means she had access to the original. "She was the executor of my father's estate," Nathan said. The words were flat, carrying the kind of weight that flat words carried when the emotion underneath them was too large to inflect normally. "She handled all of it after he died. I was 27. I let her manage it because I trusted her to manage it." "And the trust?" "I knew my father set up trusts. I didn't know the details of all of them. He was the kind of man who—" He stopped, started again. He believed in planning. He didn't always tell people what he'd planned. He liked the idea of things working themselves out the right way, whether or not people were paying attention to them. "She didn't tell you about this one?" "No," Nathan said. "She did not." He looked at the 3 documents on the desk. "She forged my signature," he said. "Yes." "She paid you to leave?" "Yes." "And she withheld a legal document that affected you and your child and—" He stopped again. Elena could see him managing the size of it, pressing it into something that would fit in a single room without detonating. "She withheld it," Elena said. "She's been withholding it for at least 3.5 years. Probably longer. She must have discovered the clause when she was handling your father's estate." 7 years, Nathan said. He did the math the way she had. She's known for 7 years. Silence. "If I bring this to a lawyer," Elena said, And it comes out that I accepted the money, even unknowingly, even under circumstances that don't hold. I look like someone who was paid to go away and then came back when the stakes got higher. I know how that reads. I need you to know that I know how it reads before you call anyone." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "You're telling me this is going to be costly for you?" "Yes. And you're telling me anyway." "Milo has legal rights his grandfather built for him," she said. "I don't get to decide those aren't worth the cost because the cost falls on me." Nathan was quiet. "Also," she said, and her voice was level, "you deserve to know what was done. Not just what I did or didn't do, what was done to both of us." He picked up the documents and squared them neatly and placed them back in the envelope. He picked up his phone. He looked at her once more before he dialed a look that lasted 3 seconds and contained more than she could easily catalog. Then he said, "I'm calling Marcus Elgin. He's the best estate attorney in New England. He's also someone my mother has never met." He dialed. "This is going to take a while," he said while the phone rang. "You should—" "I'll wait," she said. He looked at her. Then the call connected, and he turned his attention to the phone and began to speak quickly and precisely, using the voice of a man who had spent his entire professional life making things happen efficiently. Elena sat in the chair across from his desk and waited. At 10:40, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Quick, purposeful footsteps with the measured interval of a cane. They stopped outside the study door. A knock. Nathan looked at Elena. He said into the phone, "I'll call you back in 5 minutes." He ended the call. "Come in," he said. Constance came in. She was still composed, still precise, but she had lost something. Some element of the total control she had brought to every prior interaction. Elena recognized this because she had learned years ago to read the specific quality of a person's composure when it was being applied harder than usual. Constance's composure right now was working. She looked at the envelope on the desk. She looked at Nathan. She said, "I would like to explain." "I know you would," Nathan said. "Sit down." She sat. Nathan looked at her for a moment without speaking. Elena stayed still in her chair. "Tell me about the Alverton Trust," Nathan said. Constance's hands folded in her lap were very still. "Your father was sentimental about certain things," she said. "Tell me about the trust," Nathan said again. "He established it before he died. The terms were, I know the terms, I just read them. Tell me why you didn't." Constance looked at the envelope. "The trust was structured in a way that would have," she paused, "complicated the management of the general estate during the transition period. I made a judgment that the timing—" "You decided not to tell me," Nathan said. "I decided to wait until the right moment. For 7 years, the right moment didn't. For 7 years," Nathan said again, with the quiet that was not calm. "And when Miss Carter became pregnant, you went to her personally, without telling me, and you gave her a document with my forged signature and $20,000, and you told her to leave." Constance was very still. "I protected the family." "You decided to make decisions about my child's existence without consulting me," Nathan said. "You decided to forge my name. You decided to withhold a legal document my father created specifically. And you decided to let me spend 3 years believing that the woman I—" He stopped. 3 years believing something false. He looked at her. "You protected your position, not the family." Constance's expression fractured just slightly, just for a moment. It was the most human thing Elena had seen from her. "I built this family," she said. "Everything it is, I built after your father died. I was protecting what I built." "You were protecting the parts you could control," Nathan said. Constance said nothing. Nathan picked up his phone. "Marcus is sending someone tonight. I expect full cooperation with the review of my father's estate documents." He set the phone down. "And I expect you to say nothing further to Ms. Carter or to Milo without me present." Constance stood. She was still composed, still precise, but the composition had a different quality now. The quality of someone who had finished fighting one thing and had not yet decided whether to fight the next. She walked to the door. At the threshold, she stopped. She did not turn around. "He has your father's eyes," she said. Her voice was even. "The boy. The first time I saw him, I knew." She left. The door closed. Nathan and Elena were alone in the study. Nathan set down his phone and looked at the envelope on the desk for a long moment. Then he looked at Elena. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You don't," she said. "You didn't know." "I assumed," he said. "When the letter came through the agency, I assumed it was exactly what it looked like. I knew what my father thought of me, and I assumed—" He stopped. "I assumed you had made a calculation and left. I didn't look for an explanation." "Your mother is very convincing," Elena said. "That's not an excuse." "No," she said, "but it's context." He was quiet. "We should both sleep," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be complicated." He nodded slowly. He looked at the envelope one more time. "Milo," he said. "Is he—" He paused in the way of someone who had a question they had not yet found the exact shape of. "Is he well? He seems." "He's very well," Elena said. "He's happy, he's healthy. He has too many opinions about construction vehicles and no fear of strangers, and he talks to himself in two different voices when he thinks no one is listening." Something shifted in Nathan's face. Not a smile, not quite yet, but the movement that happened in the space before a smile. "The red truck," he said. "He takes it everywhere," Elena said. "He has named it." "You said he hadn't." "He told me later he was embarrassed about the name." "What's the name?" "Stephen," she said. Nathan made a sound that was quietly and briefly a laugh. It surprised him she could see that. He recovered quickly, but she had seen it, and she filed it in the part of her mind where she kept things that mattered. "Good night, Miss Carter," he said. "Good night, Mr. Voss," she said. She went back to the staff quarters. She checked on Milo, who was asleep, with Stephen, the truck, tucked under his arm. She lay in her narrow bed and looked at the ceiling, and thought about the envelope, which was no longer her secret, but was now an open thing in the world, with consequences she could not yet map. She was not afraid. She was something else. She lay there and held the feeling, carefully examining it, trying to identify it. It felt, she decided, like the moment before something you have been carrying for a long time becomes light. Not yet light, but before. The lawyer arrived the next morning. Marcus Elgin sent not himself but his senior associate, a woman named Priya Chandran, who arrived at 8 in the morning with a briefcase and the focused efficiency of someone who had been given a precise brief and intended to execute it precisely. She met with Nathan in the study. Elena was not in that meeting. She was in the kitchen wing with Milo, who was eating toast and explaining to Mrs. Garrity the structural differences between a front loader and an excavator, which Mrs. Garrity was receiving with more genuine interest than most adults would have found necessary. Elena drank her coffee and listened to Milo's explanation and tried not to track time. At 10, Mrs. Garrity received a message on her phone and looked at Elena with the careful, neutral expression of someone delivering news they had been asked to deliver carefully. "Mr. Voss would like you in the formal sitting room," she said. "Miss Chandran will be there." Elena looked at Milo. "I've got him," Mrs. Garrity said. She said it simply as a fact, and Elena believed her. She went to the formal sitting room. Priya Chandran was at the writing table with the documents spread before her. Nathan was standing near the window. Constance was seated in the high-backed chair near the fireplace, her cane resting against her knee, her hands folded in her lap. Elena sat in the chair Priya Chandran indicated. "I've reviewed the primary documents," Priya said without preamble. She had the direct, precise manner of someone who had learned that directness in complex situations was a form of respect. "The agreement bearing Mr. Voss's signature presents significant issues. The signature does not match authenticated samples of Mr. Voss's handwriting. I've requested additional samples for formal analysis, but the preliminary assessment is that the signature was not made by Mr. Voss." Constance said nothing. "The Alverton Trust document is consistent with the estate filings from 7 years prior. The clause in question is valid and irrevocable. It predates any other relevant documentation. She looked at Elena. With respect to the $20,000 payment, you received it? Yes, Elena said. The circumstances under which you received it are relevant. You were presented with a document bearing an apparently valid signature of the party with whom you believed you were settling under conditions of significant emotional and financial pressure by a person representing herself as acting on behalf of that party. I understand how it looks, Elena said. What it looks like and what it is are two different things, Priya said. The legal question is whether the agreement is enforceable. My initial view is that it is not given the fraudulent signature and the circumstances of signing. However, she paused. Constance Voss could pursue a counterposition, arguing that the agreement was ratified by your subsequent conduct, that by accepting the money and leaving, you demonstrated your understanding and acceptance of the terms, regardless of the signature. The room was quiet. She could argue that, Elena said. She could, Priya said. It would require a civil proceeding. It would be expensive and protracted, and I believe it would ultimately fail. But I want you to understand that it is a lever that could be used. Elena looked at Constance. Constance was looking at her hands. Mrs. Voss, Nathan said. He had not moved from the window. Are you going to pursue that position? Constance was quiet for a long moment. The room held the specific quality of a silence that was also a decision point. The kind of silence that shaped what happened next based entirely on what was said into it. I acted according to what I believed was best, Constance said. I won't pretend otherwise. That's not what he asked, Elena said. Constance looked at her. It was a long look, the kind that contained a complicated history on both sides. Then she looked at Nathan. No, she said. I won't pursue it. Nathan nodded once. There's more, Priya said. She looked at Constance. The clause in Mr. Richard Voss's estate documents indicates the trust was established as irrevocable. That means it has been accumulating since his death 7 years ago. It cannot be altered, dissolved, or redirected. The assets listed are substantial. She named a figure that Elena heard, and then had to hear again internally, because the first time it moved through her without fully landing. The number was very large. That trust belongs to Milo, Nathan said, unambiguously. Upon verification of parentage, Priya said, which requires a formal test, voluntary if both parties consent, court-ordered if not. I consent, Nathan said. Elena said, so do I. Then that's straightforward, Priya said. She made a note. I'll arrange the testing. Results are typically available within a few business days. In the meantime, I'll be reviewing the full estate filings. Constance stood. She picked up her cane. She stood for a moment in the middle of the sitting room, and Elena looked at her 71 years old, a white-haired woman with pearls and a cane who had built a family's management around herself, like a fortress, and had spent 7 years reinforcing the walls, and who was now standing in a room where 3 people were methodically, legally, irrevocably taking those walls apart. I'd like to know, Nathan said from the window. He turned around. Did you ever think about telling me? Constance looked at her son. Something moved in her expression. Not the calculation, not the management, but something underneath those things. Something that had been there longer than either of them, and was not easy to look at directly. Yes, she said. More than once. Why didn't you? She was quiet. Because if I told you, she said finally, you would have gone after her, and then everything I had managed would have been unmade. And I had managed so much. She paused. I had managed everything. For 25 years after your father died, I managed everything. And this was one more thing to manage. He was a person, Nathan said, not a thing to manage. I know that now, she said. She walked out. The door closed behind her. Elena sat in the chair across from Priya Chandran, and she breathed carefully and looked at the table. I need to ask you something, she said to Priya. Go ahead. During the process, the formal verification, the legal review, I still work here. I still have a contract with the estate. Is there a conflict? Priya looked at Nathan. Nathan said, Your position here is unaffected. I think, Elena said carefully, that it might be cleaner for everyone if I stepped back from the housekeeping position while the process is ongoing. Elena, I'm not leaving Newport, she said. She said it to Nathan directly, and she heard what was in her own voice, not the careful neutrality of 3 years of managed exits, but something more direct. I'm not running. I just want to be here as Milo's mother, and as the person this process is about, not as your employee. Those are 2 different things, and I don't think they can be the same thing right now. Nathan looked at her for a moment. Then he said, All right. I have some savings, she said. We can manage for a few weeks. I would like to. I know, she said. I know you would. Not yet. He absorbed this. He nodded. I'll need contact information, Priya said, practical and unruffled, for the testing appointment. They dealt with the logistics. The meeting ended. Priya packed her briefcase and went to her rental car. Elena went back to the kitchen wing and told Milo to get his jacket. They were going to go look at the ocean. They walked to the low stone wall at the end of the garden, the wall that separated the estate from the private beach, and Milo climbed up on the wall and sat with his legs dangling and his red truck Stephen held in both hands, and he looked at the water. It's big, he said. Very big, Elena said. Does it have a name? The Atlantic Ocean. He tried this out under his breath. Atlantic, he said. That's a good name. He looked at her. Are we going to stay here? She looked at him. For a while, she said. A little while. With the big man? She thought about the study last night, and the envelope on the desk, and the look on Nathan's face when he heard Milo talk about Stephen, and the laugh that had surprised him. We'll see, she said. Milo seemed to find this acceptable. He drove Stephen along the top of the wall, making small engine noises, while Elena looked at the water and let the morning sit around her without pushing against it. She had said she was not running. She had meant it. That was new. She sat with that for a long time. The testing was completed on Wednesday. The results came back Friday afternoon, by which time Elena and Milo were staying in a furnished apartment 2 miles from the estate that she was paying for with her savings and her dignity intact, which was exactly where she needed to be. Priya called her with the results. Elena listened. She said thank you and ended the call, and sat in the small kitchen of the furnished apartment and looked at the wall. Then she called Nathan. He answered on the second ring, which told her he had been waiting. You already know, she said. Priya called me too, he said. All right, she said. All right, he said. There was a pause that was not uncomfortable, the pause of 2 people who had things to say and were both taking a breath before saying them. I'd like to see him, Nathan said. I'd like to, if you're open to it. Yes, she said. He's been asking about you. A pause. He has? He wants to know if you have opinions about excavators, she said. He has very strong opinions about excavators, and he likes to compare them with people. I don't have opinions about excavators, Nathan said. You'll develop them, she said. The conversation that followed was 20 minutes long and covered logistics and timing and the legal next steps that Priya had outlined. And somewhere in the middle of it, the tone shifted from professional to something else. Something that had the particular quality of 2 people who have spent a long time talking around each other and are for the first time talking to each other instead. She noticed it. She did not name it. It was too early to name it. They arranged for Nathan to come to the apartment Saturday morning. He came at 10 with coffee for Elena, and she noticed a small construction vehicle book under his arm, the kind sold in airport gift shops, illustrated and labeled with photographs rather than drawings. Milo received the book with solemn appreciation. He opened it immediately and began narrating the excavator page with the focused expertise of someone reviewing a colleague's work. Elena watched Nathan watch Milo. She watched the careful, specific attention on his face, the kind of attention that had nothing efficient about it, that was simply present, absorbing every detail of the small person in front of him. She watched him learn the shape of his son's face, the way you learned something you had always been meant to know. "He moves like you," she said quietly, so Milo didn't hear. Nathan looked at her. "Does he?" "The way he sets his jaw when he's thinking," she said. "And his hands. He talks with his hands the way you do." Nathan looked at Milo's hands, currently gesturing to illustrate a point about bucket capacity. "I didn't know I did that," he said. "Most people don't," she said. They sat together in the small kitchen of the furnished apartment and drank their coffee while Milo educated them about excavators, and the morning light came in through the window and lay across the table, and Elena thought that this was, of all the mornings she had sat in all the temporary kitchens of all the temporary rooms, the least temporary morning she had ever had. She thought about the last 3 years, the exits and the calculations and the packed boxes, the foster care girl's bone-deep certainty that nothing was permanent for people like her, the $20,000 check she had never cashed, and the envelope she had carried for 3 years without opening. She thought about standing in the hotel lobby in Boston at 24, too young and too frightened to ask the questions she should have asked. She thought about Milo at 48 hours old, this precise and specific small person who had arrived with opinions already formed and silver blue eyes that were not hers. She had made herself small for a long time, small and portable and easy to remove from any equation. She had done it out of a belief she had carried so long she had stopped examining it. The belief that belonging somewhere was not for people like her. "I want to ask you something," Nathan said. She looked at him. "Not about the legal process," he said. "Not about logistics." "All right," she said. He looked at her with the directness that was she had come to understand how he operated when he had decided to stop managing something and simply address it. "When you came here," he said, "when you took this job, did you know it was us? Did you know it was our estate?" She had expected many questions. Not this one. She looked at the coffee in her cup. "I knew the name," she said. "I saw it on the agency list. I told myself I was taking the job because it was good pay and the timing worked and I needed the money. All of those things were true." She looked up. "And I don't know. I had been carrying that envelope for 3 years and not looking at it. Maybe some part of me had decided it was time to stop not looking." He was quiet. "I wasn't trying to," she started. "I know," he said. "I wasn't running a play," she said. "I wasn't calculating." "Elena," he said. I know who you are." The sentence landed with a specific weight. 3 years of being reduced to a complication to be managed, a variable to be resolved, a check and a forged signature, and a disappeared contractor. 3 years of being the person who had gone away. "I know who you are." She looked at him. "You don't," she said. "Not yet." "No," he said. "Not yet." He held her gaze. "I'd like to." Milo chose this moment to inform them both that the front loader was, in his expert assessment, underrepresented in popular media relative to its importance in the construction sector, and they both turned to address this concern with the seriousness it deserved, and the kitchen filled with the specific sound of a child who feels heard, and an October morning coming through the window, and coffee going pleasantly cold. Afterward, when Nathan had gone and Milo was napping with the construction vehicle book on his chest, Elena stood at the apartment window and looked at the city and felt something she did not have an immediate word for. She held it for a while, examining it. It was not happiness exactly. Happiness was a temperature, and this was a direction. It was the feeling of a person who had been walking with their eyes down for a long time and had slowly and recently, and not without cost, begun to look up. She had said she was not running. She had said she wanted to be here as Milo's mother, not as a housekeeper, not as a complication, not as a variable, as herself. She was going to have to figure out what that meant in practice. The legal process would take months, and Constance had agreed to cooperate, but Constance was not someone you trusted entirely based on one agreement. And there were practicalities and finances, and the whole complicated architecture of two people deciding what, if anything, they were to each other, and how to build that in view of a 3-year-old who had started all of this by pointing at a man and saying what he saw plainly. But she was not running. She was standing at the window in a city she had come to 3 weeks ago because a name on an agency list had called to some part of her that was tired of not looking, and she was not running. Milo woke from his nap at 4 and came to find her. He tucked himself under her arm the way he always did, warm and exact, his dark head against her side. "Is the big man coming back?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "He'll come back." "Okay," Milo said. He was quiet for a moment. "He liked my book." "He did. He asked good questions," Milo said, with the tone of someone awarding a significant compliment. "About the excavator." "I noticed," Elena said. "He can come to dinner sometime," Milo said, with the generosity of a 3-year-old who has decided someone is acceptable. "If he wants." Elena looked down at the top of his head. "I'll let him know," she said. 3 months later, the testing was formally confirmed in the legal record. The Alverton Trust was transferred into proper administration, with Elena as the legal guardian and primary trustee until Milo reached majority, as the document had specified. Constance Voss resigned from the family's board of charitable directors and withdrew from the active management of the general estate, retaining her suite at Newport and a cordial, careful relationship with her son that was rebuilding itself, slowly, imperfectly, and with the particular weight of things that had been damaged, and were not pretending otherwise. Nathan began taking Milo to the beach on Saturday mornings. It started because the weather was good and Milo wanted to see the water up close rather than from the garden wall. And it continued because Milo was excellent company on beaches, and Nathan had discovered, somewhat to his own surprise, that he was capable of being excellent company in return. He learned the names of the construction vehicles. He developed opinions about excavators that were Milo assessed after 3 weeks of Saturdays acceptable. Elena came with them most of the time. Not all of the time, she was building her own routines in Newport, a city she had now decided to stay in, without any calculation about exits. But most Saturday mornings, the 3 of them walked to the beach and stood at the water, and Milo ran at the waves, and Nathan stood beside Elena, and they talked about small things mostly, about the construction vehicle book and the ocean and what Milo had said this week, about work eventually, about her plans, her skills, the degree she had started online 3 years ago and never finished, about what she wanted, about what he wanted. The wanting was slow-moving and careful on both sides, and neither of them pretended it was simple or tried to make it simple. It had too much weight for simple, but it had the quality of something real, not a calculation, not a management of circumstances, but 2 people in the same place at the same time, choosing deliberately and with full knowledge of what it cost to stay. One afternoon in December, on the beach, Milo announced that he had decided Nathan's official title was Big Friend, because Dad was what you called someone who had been there from the beginning, and Nathan had not been there from the beginning, but he was there now, and that was a different thing that needed a different name. He said this with the complete seriousness of a small person who had given the matter significant consideration. Nathan looked at Elena. Elena looked at Nathan. "Big Friend," Nathan said. "For now," Milo said. "Maybe it changes. Names change when things change. That's how it works." He ran back toward the water, Stephen the truck tucked in the pocket of his jacket, his dark hair and his silver blue eyes in the December light perfectly himself. "He's very wise," Nathan said. "He's 3, Elena said. "Almost 4, Nathan said. "Almost 4, she agreed. They stood at the edge of the water and watched Milo negotiate with a wave, and the Atlantic was wide and cold and entirely itself, and Newport in December was pale and clear, and Elena thought about the hotel lobby in Boston and the envelope she had carried for 3 years, And the Tuesday morning in September, when she had stood at the Voss service entrance with her son on her hip and told herself this was just a paycheck. She had been wrong about that. She had been wrong about a lot of things. She had been right about one. She had been right that Milo's eyes were special. She had just not known yet how many ways that was true.